story, one that not many dare to tell and few would face. It is the death of Henry VIII, a king who was once hailed as a symbol of power and strength, but ended his life in disgrace and disgust. We often think of powerful people with images of grandeur, strength, and pride, but the story of Henry VIII shows a brutal truth. Power and beauty are just fragile veneers, easily shattered when the human body begins to decay. From a handsome, tall, and strong prince, the pride of the nation, Henry VIII became a handsome, tall, and strong prince, the pride of the nation, with a body reeking of decay. From a handsome, tall, and strong prince, the pride of the nation, completely crumbled. Henry VIII no longer came from a handsome, tall, and strong prince, the pride of the nation, completely crumbled. Henry VIII no longer came from a handsome, growing paranoia. So, how did a man who once stood at the height of power end his life in such pain, loneliness, and misery? Could it be that the wrong decisions he made throughout his life led him to pay such a heavy price? Let's follow the story of this great king, not only to witness the downfall of a man, but also to gain a deeper understanding of the limits of power, the fragility of the human body, and how even the most powerful individuals cannot escape the laws of nature. Henry VIII, born on June 28, 1491, was a model of strength and perfection from a young age. His appearance commanded attention not only because of his towering height, but also due to his muscular build, lustrous, golden red hair, and the regal expression of a prince. In the eyes of the people, he was not just a king, but a symbol of masculinity, strength, and power. Descriptions from foreign ambassadors at the time often praised him as the most handsome man in Europe, surpassing any other prince. When he ascended the throne in 1509 at the age of just 17, Henry VIII entered the royal seat with confidence and strong ambition. The young king not only carried the responsibility of protecting the kingdom, but also had to prove he was worthy of the people's expectations. Known as England's hero, Henry began crafting the image of a powerful king capable of facing any challenge. He was not just a warrior, but also a skilled leader, constantly seeking new ways to assert his strength and power. However, beneath that glamorous exterior, Henry VIII also faced formidable challenges. His life was a series of difficult decisions, and at times these decisions impacted not only himself, but the entire nation. Regardless, Henry VIII made a lasting mark in history, and his story reminds us that no matter how powerful we may be, we must still confront inevitable challenges. In January 1536, an unexpected accident completely changed the life of Henry VIII. During a jousting tournament, a mysterious and gruesome historical story, one that not many dare to tell and few would face. It is the death of Henry VIII, a king who was once hailed as a symbol of power and strength, but ended his life in disgrace and disgust. We often think of powerful people with images of grandeur, strength, and pride, but the story of Henry VIII shows a brutal truth. Power and beauty are just fragile veneers, easily shattered when the human body begins to decay. From a handsome, tall, and strong prince, the pride of the nation, Henry VIII became a morbidly obese, deteriorated man, with a body reeking of decay that no one dared to approach. His pride completely crumbled when he could no longer control the wounds from his 1536 jousting accident, the ulcers that would never heal, and the growing paranoia. So, how did a man who once stood at the height of power end his life in such pain, loneliness, and misery? Could it be that the wrong decisions he made throughout his life led him to pay such a heavy price? Let's follow the story of this great king, not only to witness the downfall of a man, but also to gain a deeper understanding of the limits of power, the fragility of the human body, and how even the most powerful individuals cannot escape the laws of nature. Henry VIII, born on June 28, 1491, was a model of strength and perfection from a young age. His appearance commanded attention not only because of his towering height, but also due to his muscular build, lustrous, golden red hair, and the regal expression of a prince. In the eyes of the people, he was not just a king, but a symbol of masculinity, strength, and power. Descriptions from foreign ambassadors at the time often praised him as the most handsome man in Europe, surpassing any other prince. When he ascended the throne in 1509 at the age of just 17, Henry VIII entered the royal seat with confidence and strong ambition. The young king not only carried the responsibility of protecting the kingdom, but also had to prove he was worthy of the people's expectations. Known as England's Hero. Henry began crafting the image of a powerful king capable of facing any challenge. He was not just a warrior, but also a skilled leader, constantly seeking new ways to assert his strength and power. However, beneath that glamorous exterior, Henry VIII also faced formidable challenges. His life was a series of difficult decisions, and at times these decisions impacted not only himself, but the entire nation. Regardless, Henry VIII made a lasting mark in history, and his story reminds us that no matter how powerful we may be, we must still confront inevitable challenges. In January 1536, an unexpected accident completely changed the life of Henry VIII. During a jousting tournament in Greenwich, his horse suddenly fell, pinning him to the ground and rendering him unconscious for 2 hours. Although he survived, the injury to his right leg left a serious consequence that he could never recover from. This wound became a chronic ulcer that would never heal and only worsened over time. The foul smell from the wound began to emanate, making it unbearable for those around him. From a strong, muscular prince, Henry now had to face a painful truth. His body was no longer strong enough to withstand everything. Since then, physical pain gradually dominated him, but it was this very injury that opened another door in Henry's mind. The physical change began to bring about a psychological shift. He could no longer maintain the pride and confidence he once had. Instead, feelings of insecurity, paranoia, and jealousy took over. The king, once at the pinnacle of power, now felt the weight of physical weakness and doubt that overshadowed every decision he made. The death of Anne Boleyn, his second wife, in the same year reflected this change in him. Her death was not due to actual wrongdoing, but rather the result of paranoia, fear, and an inability to control the thoughts in his mind. From that point on, the story of Henry VIII became a symbol of loss of control, not only over his body, but also over himself. Henry VIII's health continued to deteriorate, and his physical transformation became an inevitable tragedy. From a strong, healthy king, he now faced constant, excruciating pain and incurable ulcers. His body became increasingly deformed, weighing as much as 180 kilograms, and he found it more and more difficult to move. The doors in his palaces had to be widened so he could pass through, and he had to rely on a pulley system to move from one room to another. This not only damaged his health, but also shattered the image of the mighty king that everyone had once revered. Henry's diet was a key factor contributing to his decline. He consumed a huge amount of food daily, mostly red meat, wine, and beer, with little to no fruits and vegetables. His unhealthy eating habits, combined with a lack of exercise, quickly weakened his body. His doctors, using outdated treatments, did nothing but make his condition worse. Treatments such as applying toxic medicines, bloodletting, and even cauterizing his ulcers only made his situation more severe. Now, Henry VIII was not only a king trapped in a decaying body, but also a man who had lost control over himself. His declining health stripped him of all physical power, increasing his loneliness and paranoia in his mind. His death was not just the end of a king, but the end of a once great image that had been built long ago. Henry VIII's marital life was always full of turmoil and suffering. After 2 tragic marriages, he continued to seek solace in love and hoped to find a wife who could care for him in his final years. However, despite being a powerful king, he could not escape the loneliness and mental crises brought on by his physical weakness. When he married Catherine Howard, a 19-year-old girl, Henry hoped that love would bring him youth and new joy. However, the age difference and his deteriorating condition made this marriage an unbearable burden. Catherine, though a beautiful and young girl, could not endure the decay of her husband with whom she had to live. She sought comfort in the arms of another man, and when the affair was discovered, Henry did not hesitate to order the execution of both. This process not only reflected the physical decline of a man, but also showed his cruelty toward those around him, regardless of whether they were wives or loved ones. It was the failure of his marriages, the inability to find true love and care, that caused Henry to fall deeper into a vicious cycle of loneliness, doubt, and paranoia. Despite being the king of a great empire, he could not control himself, and this became one of the greatest tragedies of his life. The price to pay for wrong decisions in love and life is immeasurable, and Henry VIII stands as the clearest example of this. Henry VIII's life in his final years was a series of agonies and uncontrollable events. The diseases he suffered from gradually pulled him into an inevitable state of decay. He may have had diabetes, severe gout, high blood pressure, and heart failure, but no one could know the exact cause. However, what was certain was that he had to live in pain for nearly the rest of his life, and those pains affected not only his body, but also his mind. Illness and suffering changed the very nature of the man. Henry was no longer the hero in the eyes of the people, but had become a miserable figure, always in discomfort and fear. He began to experience paranoia, constantly fearing that those around him would betray him. This anxiety further alienated him from others and distanced him from those he once loved. His physical and mental exhaustion led him to gradually lose control, making rash decisions, sometimes unreasonable, such as executing trusted close associates. Henry became so fearful that he adopted extreme security measures, requiring his food to be tasted before being brought to the table. He could no longer trust anyone, not even those who had been loyal to him for years. We can see that when health weakens, everything seems to lose importance, leaving only fear and loneliness in the soul. Death approached, but Henry VIII still lived in delirium, with thoughts of betrayal and death always lurking. His tragic end is a profound reminder of the fragility of both human health and mind, no matter how much power one holds. The death of Henry VIII was not only the end of a king, but the complete collapse of a man who once held unmatched power. In the final months of his life, his health deteriorated severely. His body no longer had the strength to withstand the diseases, and prolonged fevers only made him weaker. Breathing difficulties, coughing, delirium, and the constant fear that he might be poisoned haunted his mind. However, what was most terrifying was not the physical pain, but the extreme loneliness he had to endure. As death approached, Henry had no strength left for anything other than weakly gripping Archbishop Cranmer's hand, a gesture that symbolized his continued faith, though it was too late. Although he could no longer speak, this gesture remained his final mark, showing the weakness and repentance in the heart of a man who had once stood at the peak of power. His death was not only the end of a king, but the end of an image of power that had been built over many years. The body of Henry VIII, with its enormous weight and decaying flesh, was no longer a symbol of majesty. Decomposing fluids leaked from his coffin, licked up by stray dogs, a humiliating end. His death was not just the natural conclusion of a human life, but a valuable lesson about the fragility of power, the body, and life itself. The legacy of Henry VIII remains to this day, not only in the religious changes he initiated, but also in the profound lesson about the brutality of power. His decisiveness led England to break away from the Roman Catholic Church, sparking a turbulent religious revolution. The founding of the Church of England laid the foundation for a nation with an independent religion, making the country one of the most powerful religious and political forces in Europe. However, this legacy is also a double-edged sword, as the religious upheaval lasted for centuries, causing conflict and division within society. Yet it was Henry's death that brought an even deeper lesson about the fragility of power and human helplessness in the face of physical decay. He was once a powerful king, capable of determining the fate of an entire nation, but in the end, he could not escape the natural laws. His physical and mental collapse serves as a reminder that power, no matter how great, ultimately cannot resist the deterioration of the human body and mind. The decisions he made in his final years, actions driven by fear and paranoia, only made his image fade, completely contrasting with the man he once was in his glorious years. The death of Henry VIII is an undeniable testament to the transience of power and the destruction the human body must endure. The death of Henry VIII was a tragic end for a man who once held unmatched power. His image, from a youthful and vibrant prince to a magnificent and powerful king, ultimately ended in decay, loneliness, and pain. His body, once a symbol of strength, now lay in ruins, unrecognizable. The signs of physical deterioration not only stripped away the image of power, but also caused those who once revered him to turn away. The death of Henry VIII was not only the end of a life, but also the collapse of an idealized image of absolute power. Throughout his life, he reshaped the country, changed history, and built a great legacy. Yet in the end, he could not overcome himself. Despite having everything in his grasp, he could not control his body, unable to escape the weakening and destruction brought by time. Henry VIII's legacy endures, but his death reminds us that nothing is permanent. Power and strength, no matter how great, will eventually be replaced by the natural laws of life. His death is not just the end of a great figure, but a lesson in the transience of everything and the fragility of humans in the face of time and disease. Welcome back to Channel History. Today, I'm going to reveal a secret that could completely change the way you view one of the most famous modern fairy tales in the world, the life of Princess Diana. You think you know everything about her, the shy girl who became a global icon, the people's woman who touched the hearts of millions. But what if I told you that everything you thought you knew about her family is nothing but a perfectly crafted lie? We've always been taught that Princess Diana came from the wealthy and respected Spencer family. It's a beautiful story, but it's just the surface. Because hidden beneath the name Spencer is another bloodline, a darker bloodline, one that holds betrayal, forbidden love, and tragedies buried deep in history. The bloodline I'm talking about isn't Spencer, it's Tudor. Yes, the very same Tudor dynasty of King Henry VIII, the dynasty of queens executed broken vows, and one of the bloodiest periods in English history. You're probably thinking, this can't be true. Official history claims the Tudor line ended with Queen Elizabeth I. And on paper, that's correct. But official history is sometimes the most meticulously crafted lie. If you think the Tudor story is over, let me reopen it for you. Our story doesn't start in a lavish palace, but in the shadows, with a woman whose name history has tried to erase. Her name was Mary Tudor. Not the bloody Queen Mary, but another Mary, the youngest sister of Henry VIII, a woman of legendary beauty, with fiery red gold hair and eyes that could be both gentle and fierce. Henry loved her. He called her his pearl. But even precious pearls can be locked away. In 1514, Mary was married off to King Louis VII of France, an old, frail man, solely for Henry's political gain. A lively, passionate woman with spirit was thrust into the cold stone halls of a foreign court, surrounded by suspicious eyes and whispered words. But only 82 days after the wedding, King Louis passed away. Mary became a widow, and more importantly, she was free. But that freedom didn't last. Henry would soon decide her next husband because, to him, his sister wasn't family. She was just a pawn on the European power chessboard. But Mary had a promise full of danger. However, Mary had a promise full of danger and betrayal, a vow given to the man she truly loved, Charles Brandon, Duke of Suffolk, the closest friend of King Henry. Charles was not a royal, but he held a special place in the king's heart and had captured Mary's heart completely. They had sworn together that if Mary became a widow, she would choose her next husband herself. She would choose him. Challenging Henry VIII meant a death sentence, but for love, some risks were worth taking. When news of King Louis's death reached England, Henry acted swiftly. He sent Charles Brandon to France with a clear order, "Bring my sister back home safely." But there was another command, unspoken, sharp as a blade, "Do not touch her." Henry knew of their feelings for each other and trusted that Charles would not betray that trust. As proof, Henry gave Charles a heavy golden signet ring. "This is my trust in you," Henry said. "Do not betray it." Imagine Charles on that ship, the cold sea spray hitting his face, the weight of the ring burning in his pocket. He was torn between two loyalties, one to the king who had given him everything, the other to the woman who was the only one who could bring him happiness. Choosing Mary was a gamble with his life. Obeying Henry was betraying his own love. When Charles arrived at the French court, he saw Mary draped in mourning, her room bathed in black velvet. But when their eyes met, the sorrow faded into something else. Recognition, desperation, a wordless plea. That night, Mary confronted Charles. She was no longer a shy girl. "Will you marry me?" she asked. It was not a question, but a threat. Charles hesitated, warning her of Henry's wrath, of the Tower of London, of the executioner's blade. He reminded her of the case of Edmund de la Pole, whom Henry had executed simply because he was a distant threat to the throne. But Mary didn't back down. "If you don't marry me right now," she whispered fiercely, "you'll take me back to England, and I'll be forced into another marriage. and I will make sure the king knows you are the one who rejected me." It was a masterful psychological move. She trapped him. The king's fury if he married her, or the king's fury if he abandoned her. And so, in a small chapel on the outskirts of Paris, with only a trembling old priest and a few frightened servants as witnesses, they defied a king. As Charles slipped a borrowed ring onto Mary's finger, a strong gust of wind blew open the chapel door, extinguishing half the candles and plunging the room into darkness. The old priest, Gaspard, trembled before the omen. They had married, and they had been cursed. As the omen foretold, the journey back to England was a torment. Every creak of the ship sounded like an axe grinding on a chopping block. Every wave crashing against the side of the ship felt like Henry's fists pounding on the door. They couldn't eat, they couldn't sleep. Letter after letter was sent to the king, pleading for mercy, begging for intervention from Cardinal Wolsey, the so-called second king. They were willing to offer everything: Mary's dowry, even the most priceless jewels, if it meant they could live. But when the ship docked in Dover, the welcome was colder than the sea. No flags, no cheers, just a few officials. One of them, Sir Giles, refused to address Mary as Your Majesty. Instead, he looked at Charles with a mix of pity and disdain. The message was clear: you are no longer a friend of the king, you are a traitor. They were summoned to London not as honored guests, but as prisoners. The story of their secret marriage spread like wildfire. By the time they reached the capital, the entire court was buzzing, and at the center of it all was King Henry VIII, angrier than ever. This was not just disobedience, not just betrayal. This was a personal insult. Mary was his sister. Charles was his closest friend. Together, they had made a fool of him before all of Europe, and Henry VIII was not the kind of man to forgive someone who made him look foolish. What awaited them was not a royal reunion, but a sentence. In Henry's court, sentences were always written in fear. They were separated. Mary was taken to a magnificent room filled with flowers and fine food, but the door was locked from the outside. It was a gilded cage. Charles was taken to a bare stone room with only a single window looking out at a blank wall. His world shrank to four walls and tormenting thoughts. This was Henry's first move. Not an axe, not a dungeon, but isolation. He wanted fear to eat away at them from within. Weeks passed with no word, no verdict, no forgiveness, only silence. A silence so heavy it felt like a living creature. Finally, the summons came, but only for Charles. He was led through the maze of corridors at Greenwich Palace. At last, he was brought to a private office. Sitting behind a massive oak desk was Henry VIII. He did not shout, he did not rage. Instead, he calmly cleaned his fingernails with a dagger, as if Charles's fate were merely a trivial matter. Then, with a voice almost gentle, he said, "Charles, my friend, did you truly think I wouldn't find out?" Henry passed judgment. First, there was money. Mary and Charles would have to return every penny of her dowry. They would be nobles in name only, but in reality, they would be beggars. Second, there was the humiliation. They would be forced to publicly remarry before the entire court, kneeling before Henry to beg for his forgiveness. Their love story would not be remembered as a challenge, but as submission. But the final condition was the cruelest. "Your children," Henry said, his voice as hard as stone, "they will live because I allow it. They will have no royal rights or titles. Their marriage will be decided by me. You want a family born from love? You shall have it, but it will be a family shackled by my crown. You will never be free." Charles left that room broken. He had walked in fearing death, but walked out with a far worse sentence: a lifetime of enslavement to the man who despised him the most. So Mary and Charles lived. They had children, 2 daughters, Frances and Eleanor, who survived to adulthood. On the outside, their life seemed enviable: silken clothes, lavish feasts, a grand estate, but it was all a performance, a carefully staged play for one audience only: Henry VIII. Every decision, every conversation, every guest was watched. Their butler, Master Croft, appeared loyal, but in reality he was a spy for the king. Westhorpe Hall, their home, was not a haven, but a prison with flowers on the windowsill. Their children grew up in a strange contradiction: privileged, but always haunted. They were the granddaughters of a king, the granddaughters of a queen, but they were forbidden from speaking of it. Their royal blood was not a blessing. It was a curse. Frances, the eldest daughter, inherited her mother's fire. proud, strong, and fearless. But she too was caught in Henry's web. When she came of age, her marriage was not her choice. It was arranged by the royal family, a carefully orchestrated connection meant to control the dangerous Tudor blood flowing in her veins. She married Henry Grey, the Marquis of Dorset. A reasonable match, but not a romantic one, and certainly not one built on love. It was a cage with silk bars. Mary and Charles could only watch in agony as their own defiance, their fight for freedom, was denied through their daughter. This was Henry's revenge. It was not just aimed at them, it was aimed at their children. Francis and Henry Grey had 3 daughters, Jane, Catherine, and Mary. The 3 girls carried both promise and peril in their veins. The most famous of them, of course, was Jane, the clever, bookish girl who would one day be known as the 9 Days Queen. By that time, Henry VIII had passed away. His sickly son, Edward VI, sat on the throne, controlled by Protestant lords. They needed a replacement heir, someone with Tudor blood, but who was also Protestant. And they turned to Jane Grey. Jane was only 16. She wanted books, not a crown. She wanted to study, not play politics. But her parents and their allies had struck a deal with the ambitious Duke of Northumberland. Jane would marry his son. Jane would become queen. She cried, she begged, but no one listened. She was swept up in the tide of ambition. In July of 1553, Jane was declared Queen of England. She was taken to the Tower of London, not as a prisoner, but as a queen. The crown was placed on her head, heavy enough that she could barely hold it upright. The courtiers bowed, but their smiles were thin, insincere. Jane was alone. One of her attendants, Tilly, later recalled that the only time Jane smiled was when she read a letter from her old tutor. In that brief moment, she was not a queen. She was just a girl. But the kingdom did not stand by her. It stood by Mary Tudor, Henry's eldest daughter, who had the unassailable claim. In just 9 days, Jane's reign ended. Northumberland was executed. Jane, her husband, and her father were arrested. And in a final act of cruelty, Frances, Jane's mother, abandoned her daughter, pleading with the new Queen Mary to spare her own life, leaving Jane to face the executioner alone. In February of 1554, Jane watched from her tower window as her young husband was led to the scaffold. She saw the cart carrying his headless body pass by her room. A few hours later, it was her turn. 17 years old, calm, regal. She climbed the scaffold, blindfolded, but as she reached for the block, she couldn't find it. "What do I do?" she cried in panic. "Where is it?" A guard took her hand and guided it to the cold wood, and there, in one final, terrible moment, the blood born from the forbidden love of Mary Tudor and Charles Brandon was paid for. The axe fell. Henry VIII's niece was dead. The king's revenge was complete. At least, it seemed complete. The death of Lady Jane Grey should have been the bloody end to a story that had spanned generations. But blood is stubborn. Henry VIII may have thought he had wiped out the legacy of Mary Tudor when Jane's head rolled on the scaffold. But he had forgotten one thing. Jane had sisters, Catherine and Mary Grey, and their lives would prove that the curse of that bloodline wasn't over. It would echo through the centuries. Catherine Grey was everything her bookish sister was not. Graceful, charming, and according to all accounts, stunningly beautiful. But she carried the same dangerous heritage. The Tudor blood. Under Queen Elizabeth I, this was deadly. Elizabeth was famously unwilling to marry or name a successor. That meant Catherine, as a senior descendant of Henry VII's daughter, was considered by many to be the legitimate heir in name. She was a living alternative to the Queen herself, and Elizabeth, like her father, was in a constant state of panic. Catherine knew the danger. She had witnessed her sister Jane die for a crown she never wanted. She should have stayed silent, lived in seclusion. But she fell in love. His name was Edward Seymour. They married in secret, and when Catherine's growing belly could no longer be hidden, Elizabeth's fury erupted. The Queen did not have her executed. No, she chose a more brutal punishment. Elizabeth declared Catherine's marriage invalid, her children illegitimate. And then she imprisoned her, moving her from one squalid castle to another, never allowing her to see her husband again. Catherine withered away, dying at 27, officially from illness, but in truth, from a broken heart. The youngest, Mary Grey, was born with a stunted frame and a curved spine. The court mocked her, treating her like a harmless figure, not a threat to anyone. But Mary also carried the Tudor flame, And like her sisters and great-grandmother before her, she dared to marry for love. Of her choice, a man far beneath her station, a junior officer serving the queen. Elizabeth was not pleased. With this act, Mary was also confined to her home. Separated from her husband for many years, she died in obscurity, another victim of the curse that began with a secret marriage in France centuries before. The message from the royal family was brutally clear. This bloodline would never be allowed to thrive. It would be imprisoned, stripped, diluted until it disappeared. And for a time, it succeeded. The surviving children of Catherine Grey were declared illegitimate. They were stripped of royal closeness, reduced to minor nobility. Their descendants became country landowners, parish priests, wives of ministers. The fiery Tudor blood slowly thinned, forgotten, hidden in the lower classes of English society. But blood has a way of finding cracks, of surviving in silence. Centuries passed, the Tudors faded into history, the Stuarts rose and fell, the Hanoverians took the throne, and the Grey blood, the blood of Mary Tudor, quietly slinked into another family name, Spencer. For many generations, the Spencer family was not royal, not even close to royal. They were wealthy sheep farmers, landowners known for stability and good business, respected but unremarkable. Yet deep in their family tree, hidden like a forgotten inscription on an old medal, was the blood of Mary Tudor, Charles Brandon, Jane Grey, and Catherine Grey. It had survived, waiting. Fast forward to the 20th century. John Spencer, the 8th Earl Spencer, had a daughter, a shy, reserved girl with deep blue eyes full of dreams. She worked as a kindergarten assistant, completely removed from the glitz and glamour of royal life. Her name was Diana Frances Spencer. That middle name, Frances, was not chosen randomly. It was a surname passed down from her ancestors, Frances Brandon, the daughter of Mary Tudor and Charles Brandon. When Diana married Prince Charles, heir to the British throne, the world called it a fairy tale, a commoner marrying into royalty. But it was anything but. It was the greatest historical irony. The bloodline that Henry VIII had tried to erase, the family he had humiliated, imprisoned, and made disappear, had now returned to the heart of the monarchy. Through Diana, the blood of Mary Tudor flowed back into the royal line. Through her, the genetic legacy of defiance and tragedy was restored. Her son, Prince William, is now the heir to the throne, carrying that bloodline, the same bloodline Henry VIII once deemed unworthy of power, the same bloodline that witnessed a 17-year-old girl being executed on the scaffold, the same bloodline that queens tried to suppress and kings tried to erase. It has returned. It will sit on the throne. History is rarely a straight line. More often, it is a circle. Mary Tudor's choice to marry for love defied a king. It spawned a bloodline cursed by fear, shame, and death. Through generations, that bloodline was punished, stripped of status, forced into silence. Yet it survived, and centuries later it returned, not as a threat lurking in the shadows, but as the mother of a future king. So, the next time you look at Princess Diana or her sons, William and Harry, look deeper, beyond the name Spencer, beyond the name Windsor. See the shadow of another family. See Mary Tudor, the girl who chose love over duty. See Charles Brandon, the man who risked everything for her. See Lady Jane Grey, the young queen who bravely walked to her death. See Catherine and Mary Grey, who quietly endured for the love they refused to give up. Their story didn't vanish. It just waited. Waited until a shy young woman named Diana brought it home. Perhaps that's why Diana touched the world's heart so deeply. She was not just the people's princess. She was something older, darker, more defiant. She was the vengeance of the Tudors, a bloodline once buried, once broken, now standing in the spotlight. A story that began in a dusty chapel in France more than 500 years ago, sealed by a secret promise, still lives in the eyes of a future king. Nearly 500 years ago, within the cold walls of the English palace, a marriage was arranged in exchange for power and political security. Yet, instead of securing a strong alliance, it became one of the most shocking tragedies of the Tudor dynasty. At the center of this story stands Anne of Cleves, the woman remembered by posterity with the bitter title, the rejected wife of King Henry VIII. From the very first meeting, the most powerful monarch in Europe at the time expressed his disappointment regarding Anne as a mistake he was forced to endure. But was it truly just because she was not beautiful enough, as the rumors claimed, or was there another secret that made Henry so repulsed? Anne's story is not merely about appearance. It begins with the cold calculations of politics, where marriage was not built on love but on interests, blood, and power. In that vortex, Anne was swept in, becoming a pawn on the stormy European chessboard. Yet instead of disappearing like many women of her time, Anne left an indelible mark, not only because of her short-lived marriage, but also because of the way she survived in a ruthless world where most of Henry's wives paid with their very lives. Welcome back to Channel History, where we turn the forgotten pages of the past and uncover the truth behind stories that may seem all too familiar. Join me on a journey that is both intriguing and haunting to understand why Anne of Cleves, once a princess from a distant land, became the strangest figure among Henry VIII's wives. Anne of Cleves did not come from an ordinary background. She was born into a powerful family, her father being the Duke of Cleves, a man renowned for his toughness, standing firmly against both the Pope and other Catholic monarchs. In the context of 16th century Europe, which was deeply divided by religion, Anne grew up as a potential pawn in the game of power. It was a time when daughters were not taught to dream of love, but to prepare themselves to become instruments of politics. And for Anne, that moment came sooner than she expected. In England, King Henry VIII had broken away from the Catholic Church after divorcing Catherine of Aragon. He needed new allies, a bond with powerful Protestant lords to protect his throne, and in that calculation, his eyes turned to Anne. But Henry could not rely on introductions alone. He needed to see, to feel, before making his decision. A famous court painter, Hans Holbein, was sent all the way to Cleves to paint portraits of Anne and her younger sister Amalia. The king gave clear instructions: no flattery, no beautifying beyond reality. For him, a portrait would serve as the equivalent of a meeting. However, under German customs, women had to keep their faces covered very modestly. Holbein had to rely on patience and persuasion to finally see the true faces of the sisters. When the portrait returned, Henry looked at it and chose Anne. That decision did not stem from affection, but from political advantage. Anne was the eldest daughter with greater inheritance rights. He believed this was a wise choice, but history would show that it was from this very decision that a tragedy began. The first day Henry met Anne should have been the moment that marked the beginning of a new alliance, but instead, it became a tragic turning point. When Anne's bridal procession stopped at Rochester, Henry staged one of the romantic games he so enjoyed, disguising himself as a commoner to suddenly appear for his future bride. He expected a look of recognition, a joyful smile, or at least a spark of emotion at seeing her destined man. But reality played out in the opposite way. Anne, who had grown up in a strict environment where women were required to maintain decorum and distance, had no idea about this theatrical act. When she saw a strange man approaching, she did not sense romance, only discomfort and caution. Some accounts even suggest that she turned away, deliberately avoiding his gaze. To Henry, this was nothing less than a slap to his pride. From that very moment, everything changed in the king's eyes. He no longer saw Anne as a bride, but as an insult. When the official meeting took place afterward, words of criticism began to surface. She is not at all as beautiful as she was praised to be. From one small incident, the first impression turned into a verdict for the entire marriage. Henry carried that disappointment into the wedding ceremony, and it would soon become the perfect excuse for him to reject Anne later on. What seemed like a harmless encounter had quietly planted the seeds for one of the most disastrous marriages in the history of the English monarchy. The wedding between Henry and Anne took place in early 1540 in a splendid and solemn atmosphere, but behind the lively music and shimmering candlelight, the coldness in the king's eyes was evident. He entered the ceremony like a man forced into his own decision. The wedding night, which should have been the moment to unite the newlyweds, instead turned into a disaster. Henry complained that he felt no attraction toward Anne, even going so far as to invent the cruel claim that she had an unpleasant odor, words so harsh that history still remembers them today. For Henry, the lack of harmony in the bedchamber was nothing less than a death sentence for the marriage. Yet ironically, he did not dare admit his own impotence. To preserve his honor, Henry declared that the marriage could not continue because Anne had once been betrothed as a child. Within just 6 months, from the moment she entered the chapel to the time she left, Anne had become the shortest-lived wife on the king's list. That marriage was not only a failure between two people, but also a crack in Henry's political ambitions. He wanted a queen who was both beautiful and able to secure a strong alliance. But in the end, he gained only humiliation and mockery. For Anne, those months were a harsh trial, but they also opened a door few could have expected. She escaped life with Henry while preserving both her honor and her life, something most of his other wives could not achieve. After the marriage collapsed, many thought Anne's fate would be the same as other women who had passed through Henry's life, humiliated, imprisoned, or even executed. But something unexpected happened. Instead of lashing out in anger, Henry treated Anne in an unusual way. He granted her mansions, estates, a large annual income, and a special title, the king's beloved sister. This position elevated Anne to a rank just below the queen and princesses, making her one of the most powerful women in England without having to bear the burdens of the throne. Anne also showed her strength and wisdom. She did not complain or rebel, but chose to remain gracious, maintaining good relations with Henry and the court. She often sent gifts to the king, and especially to his children. Edward, Mary, and Elizabeth all respected her, treating her as true family. It was this diplomacy that allowed Anne to live safely within a palace full of intrigue, where a single misstep could cost one's life. Though free from marriage, Anne was not spared from rumors. Some claimed she was pregnant, possibly with Henry's child. Others suggested she hoped to remarry him after Catherine Howard was executed. But in the end, Henry chose Catherine Parr. Even so, Anne managed to retain her position, her respect, and above all, her life. Among Henry's wives, she was the one who turned a bitter failure into the beginning of a free and peaceful life. Anne was not distinguished in music, painting, or the refined pleasures that Henry so deeply adored. Nor was she the type of dazzling woman who could captivate a crowd the moment she entered a room. But Anne possessed a far more enduring and subtle weapon: intelligence and adaptability. Soon after arriving in England, she quickly learned the language to communicate, integrate, and win favor. She understood well that to live peacefully in a court full of traps, the key was not to compete for the king's love, but to secure the trust and affection of those who truly held the future, Henry's children. For many years, Anne became a quiet companion to Edward, Mary, and Elizabeth. She offered gifts, showed care, and in return received respect from those who would go on to shape England. This not only gave Anne a comfortable life, but also ensured that she was never cast aside or forgotten. While many other queens lived in fear, Anne enjoyed her middle years in peace. In 1557, she died at the age of 41, likely from cancer. The court granted her a special honor: burial at Westminster Abbey, the resting place of England's kings and queens. On her tomb, the inscription still reads, "Queen of England," a testament that, despite her short marriage, Anne forever remained part of royal history. And more importantly, she stood as living proof that sometimes survival itself is the greatest victory. Anne of Cleves entered history with a name that sounds bitter: the rejected wife. But if we look deeper, her story is not merely one of humiliation at being scorned for her appearance by a king, but a testament to the strength of patience, wisdom, and the will to survive. While many other women were swept into the whirlpool of power and paid with their lives, Anne chose a different path. She did not oppose Henry, nor did she try to compete, but skillfully accepted her fate, preserving her freedom and dignity. That choice made her one of the rare wives of Henry who lived out her life in full. Anne's story compels us to ask, what does it truly mean to be a queen? Must it be power, crowns, and thrones? Or is it the ability to preserve one's peace amidst the storm, while still leaving a lasting impression on future generations? Anne proved that sometimes victory does not lie in being loved or not, but in being able to rise above rejection and turn it into an opportunity to live a freer, happier life. Anne's ending was not just the conclusion of a failed marriage, but the opening of a lesson that remains valuable even today. When faced with pain and injustice, you may fall, but you can also choose to stand firm and find your own path. And in the violent history of Henry VIII, Anne of Cleves shines as vivid proof that survival, at times, is the most beautiful form of triumph. The life of Anne of Cleves is a striking paradox. She entered her marriage with Henry VIII as a pawn in the political chessboard, only to become the victim of scorn and rejection. 6 months as queen seemed like the end of a young woman's life, but from that very failure, Anne carved out another path. She did not choose confrontation, nor did she harbor resentment. Instead, she quietly adapted, lived with kindness, and skillfully maintained her relationship with Henry and his children. Because of this, Anne enjoyed a peaceful, wealthy, and respected life, and was even laid to rest at Westminster Abbey, an honor not all of Henry's wives received. Her story is a reminder that in life, we cannot always control what happens to us, but we can always decide how we respond. It was her tact, patience, and ability to turn failure into opportunity that ensured Anne is remembered not as a victim, but as a silent victor. The lesson is this: when faced with rejection, failure, or injustice, instead of falling into resentment, learn to remain calm, preserve your self-worth, and find another path forward. In work, in love, or in the challenges of modern life, wisdom and patience can help you transform failure into an opportunity for a happier life. What do you think? Is survival and keeping peace a greater victory than power itself? Share your thoughts in the comments so everyone can discuss together. And don't forget to subscribe to Channel History to support us in bringing you more fascinating and meaningful stories from the past. There is a little-known fact. The Tudor dynasty, renowned for names such as Henry VIII and Elizabeth Thirst, once stood on the brink of collapse after less than 15 years of existence. In its fragile early days, that throne was threatened not by a mighty foreign army, but by ordinary people within England itself. A group of poor peasants, craftsmen, and fishermen from the distant land of Cornwall decided to rise and challenge royal authority. And what sends shivers down the spine is that they advanced all the way to the gates of London, just one step away from altering the course of English history entirely. This is not a story of grand battles with knights in shining armor or of glorious naval victories. This is a story of the people's fury, of an uprising that seemed small but became a true nightmare for Henry VII, the founding king of the Tudor dynasty. Had he hesitated for even a moment, had he shown weakness, that fledgling dynasty might have disappeared right there at Blackheath in 1497. Welcome back to Channel History. Let us delve into that fateful moment to see why an uprising of the poor carried within it the power to make an entire dynasty tremble, and why Henry VII was forced to crush it at all costs. This marks the beginning of one of the harshest lessons about power, faith, and the price of rebellion. After defeating Richard III at Bosworth and ascending the throne, Henry VII became the first king of the Tudor dynasty. But that crown was far from light. It rested upon a foundation still too fragile, surrounded by enemies waiting in the shadows and whispers questioning his legitimacy. Henry knew that even the smallest upheaval could shake the power he had just won with blood. In that context, a decision that seemed simple ignited a storm. To prepare for war with Scotland, Henry raised taxes across the kingdom. For the people of Cornwall in the far southwest, this was an injustice. They lived far from the northern battlefront, had nothing to do with that war, yet still bore the heavy tax burden. Frustration built into anger, and anger turned into action. From small villages, ordinary folk, peasants, craftsmen, fishermen decided to rise. Remarkably, they were not led by some celebrated general or nobleman, but by a blacksmith named Michael on Guff and a lawyer named Thomas Flummank. It was they who turned scattered resentment into a full-scale march, spanning hundreds of kilometers, straight toward London. That crowd sought not only justice for themselves, but carried a greater ambition: to challenge a dynasty that had yet to take root. And out of that seemingly hopeless fury arose one of Henry VII's greatest trials. On June 17th, 1497, at Blackheath on the outskirts of London, the air was thick with tension. On one side stood the vast rebel host stretching for miles, Cornish men carrying hopes of reclaiming justice. They had marched tirelessly, passed through countless villages, and fanned the flames of resistance ever higher. Their number, reaching 15,000, gave them faith that the strength of the many could change destiny. But that faith was soon put to a cruel test. Facing them was Henry VII's royal army, some 25,000 strong, well-trained and fully armed. These were no longer uncoordinated commoners, but a disciplined force hardened by war. When the two sides met, the imbalance was plain. The rebels had courage but lacked organization. They had rage but no strategy. And on the battlefield, those differences marked the fragile line between life and death. As the war drums thundered, Blackheath shook. The royal army charged, swords and spears gleaming, ranks tight and unyielding. At first, the rebels resisted fiercely, but within moments, chaos consumed them. Spears were shattered, lines were torn apart, small groups were encircled and cut down. Blood stained the fields, and Cornwall's hopes dissolved into smoke. That afternoon, thousands lay dead, while leaders such as Michael Angoff and Thomas Flamanck were captured. They knew the gallows awaited, yet their legacy remained a tragic memory. The courage of ordinary people who dared to rise against an entire dynasty. For Henry VII, the Battle of Blackheath was not merely a military clash, but the greatest test of the Tudor dynasty's very survival. He knew well that the throne he had seized with blood at Bosworth was still fragile. A successful uprising so close to the capital could shatter everything, embolden enemies lurking in the shadows, and turn the Tudors into nothing more than a fleeting name in history. That is why Henry did not allow himself to appear weak, nor grant even the slightest concession. When news came of the Cornish army marching toward London, Henry did not hesitate. He mobilized his strongest forces, determined to extinguish the flames of rebellion while they still burned. It was not an act of cruelty, but the only way to secure the crown and send a clear message. The Tudors would not be shaken, and anyone who opposed them would pay the price. That resolve revealed the nature of a cautious king who could be utterly cold when necessity demanded. Victory at Blackheath consolidated Henry VII's power. From a newly crowned king still doubted by many, he became a symbol of control and iron discipline. The people now understood the Tudor throne was not easily overturned, while the nobility and hidden rivals realized Henry was no weak ruler. He proved that for a dynasty to survive, it needed not only to win on the first day, but also to make hard decisions to safeguard every step that followed. The Battle of Blackheath left a unique mark on English history, not only for its brutality, but for its deeper significance beyond a failed uprising. For Henry VII, this was the moment that proved his crown could withstand trials. From a fledgling dynasty, the Tudors showed all of Europe that they could face danger and would not fall easily. From that victory, Henry secured the people's trust and the nobility's respect, paving the way for a dynasty that would last more than a century. But if we look only from the crown's perspective, we miss the deeper lesson. For the people of Cornwall, though their rebellion failed, it revealed an undeniable truth. The voices of ordinary men could shake a throne. They lacked advanced weapons and clever strategy, but they had faith and courage enough to march to London's gates. The price they paid was blood and lives. Yet their sacrifice reminds posterity that the people's anger, even when crushed, remains a fire that can threaten any power. The lesson still holds today. Numbers alone cannot bring victory without organization and leadership, but the will and longing for justice, even in defeat, leave a powerful imprint on history. Blackheath, therefore, was not only Henry VII's triumph, but also a testament to the hidden strength of common people when they dare to rise for what they believe in. The Battle of Blackheath in 1497 ended not only with Henry VII's victory, but also with a stern warning to all who might challenge the Tudor throne. In that moment, a young dynasty survived a life-or-death trial and proved it could endure. Through decisiveness and firmness, Henry held his crown and laid the foundation for his family's prosperity. Yet beneath the glow of triumph still echoed the cries of thousands of Cornish men who had sacrificed themselves for what they believed was justice. History does not forget them, for they showed that even a mighty dynasty could be shaken by the fury of the people. This story, though more than 5 centuries old, still carries lessons for the present. It reminds us that power is never absolute, and that the stability of a nation comes not only from military might or a crown, but from the consent of its people. Blackheath reveals a bitter truth. When trust is betrayed, the people can become an army, and even the greatest dynasties must take heed. So, if that day the Cornish rebels had won, would there still be a Tudor dynasty for us to remember today? History chose Henry VII, but the question lingers, stirring reflection. Share your thoughts, for it is in debate that history becomes most alive. And if you wish to continue exploring the hidden stories behind little-known events, stay with Channel History, where countless secrets still await to be uncovered. There is a truth that will leave anyone who hears it stunned. In a bloody battle between two nations, the person who played the role of defending the entire Kingdom of England was not the powerful King Henry VIII, but rather his young wife, Catherine of Aragon. The image of a queen bearing the heavy responsibility of the entire nation with war looming has become one of the most memorable moments of the Tudor dynasty. Welcome back to the History Channel. Today, we will explore one of the lesser-known stories, yet one that has the power to change the way we view a woman who is seemingly only associated with a role within the palace. In 1513, when Henry VIII took his army to France to wage war, he left England in a perilous position. To the north, Scotland, a longtime ally of France, was waiting for an opportunity to attack. In that moment, instead of appointing a male general to take charge, Henry placed his full trust in Catherine, a woman just in her 20s entrusted with the responsibility of safeguarding the entire kingdom. Imagine this. The country faces the threat of invasion, the people are panicked, and the court is anxious. And Catherine, a young queen, steps forward, unafraid. She issues orders, she calls for action, she transforms the weakness often attributed to women into strength to reassure the entire nation. Behind her gentle beauty is a steel spirit, and that is the mystery that makes the story of the Battle of Flodden an unforgettable chapter in history. In 1513, Europe was a chessboard of power, where kings continually schemed and killed to assert their dominance. Henry VIII, in his thirst for fame and desire to make his mark, decided to lead his army across the sea to France. For him, this was an opportunity to prove that England was no longer a weak kingdom, but one strong enough to stand shoulder to shoulder with the great powers of the continent. But when the king left, the country was immediately put in a perilous position. To the north, Scotland, a longtime ally of France, awaited that opportunity like a raised sword, ready to strike. In that tense situation, no one expected that the responsibility for maintaining the kingdom's borders would fall to a woman. Catherine of Aragon, the young queen, was faced with a situation that many men might have shrunk from. But instead of fear, she stepped forward and took on the leadership role as if it were the most natural thing in the world. No longer was she the image of a queen hidden behind the throne. Catherine now became the spiritual pillar for both the court and the people. Imagine this. The country is on the brink of war, and all eyes are on one woman. That burden could crush anyone, but for Catherine, it became her motivation. She not only held the faith of the nation, but also sparked a sense of pride among the people, that they were being led by a queen with enough courage and intellect to face the storm. And from here, the story leads to one of the most heroic battles in Tudor history. On September 9th, 1513, a gray sky enveloped the land of Flodden Field, where two powerful armies faced off. In front was King James IV of Scotland, with tens of thousands of soldiers full of vigor. He believed this was a golden opportunity to strike directly at England, secure a glorious victory, and assert the strength of his people. In front of him was the smaller English army, about 26,000 men, led by Earl Surrey. But in crucial moments, numbers do not always lead to victory. The terrain of Flodden did not favor Scotland. The muddy rain and steep land made the long pikes, the weapon expected to crush the enemy, awkward and disadvantageous. Meanwhile, the English, quicker with short swords and bows, advanced step by step, attacking from the hillside. The sound of swords clashing, the shouts of battle, the smoke of gunpowder, and the smell of blood mixed together, turning the field into a sea of chaos. In the midst of the gunfire, James IV charged like a true warrior, leading his men with courage, but his bravery could not change the outcome. As the sun began to set, the result of the battle was clear. The King of Scotland fell in the battlefield, and thousands of his soldiers and nobles lay there. It was the most disastrous defeat in Scottish history, a wound not only military but also spiritual. Catherine of Aragon did not take up a sword on the battlefield, but the victory at Flodden bears her indelible mark. When Henry VIII was absent, she shouldered the greatest responsibility, keeping the country from collapsing. That woman, just in her 20s, stood before the court, ordered the mobilization of soldiers, encouraged loyalty, and instilled the belief that England could overcome this challenge. Not everyone has the courage to do this, especially when all eyes are on her with doubt. But Catherine was not afraid. She turned pressure into strength, transforming fear into a flame that urged the army and the people to unite. After the news of the victory spread, Catherine did not choose silence or merely rejoice in the palace. She had the blood-stained armor of King James IV sent to Henry VIII in France. It was not just a war trophy, but a declaration. Although she did not lead the army directly, she had successfully protected England. This act was both symbolic and demonstrated sharp political wisdom, helping elevate the position of the Tudor dynasty on the international stage. What is admirable is that Catherine never took credit for the victory. She remained humble, allowing the triumph to be remembered as a collective achievement of the entire nation. But history cannot forget. Without her quiet yet determined leadership, England might have faced another tragedy. Catherine proved that sometimes a woman can become the strongest wall of an entire kingdom. The Battle of Flodden not only ended with the blood and tears of thousands of Scottish soldiers, but it also left meanings far beyond a war. For Scotland, it was a horrifying shock. They lost a king, the elite noble class, and their pride on the battlefield. It was a wound not easily healed, a pain that haunted many generations to come. But for England, this victory became a strong affirmation. The Tudor dynasty was strong enough to stand firm against the greatest dangers, capable of protecting its existence in a turbulent Europe. And above all, the Battle of Flodden highlighted the image of Catherine of Aragon. In the flow of history, she is often remembered as a queen abandoned by her husband, an unfortunate woman in her marriage to Henry VIII. But looking back at that moment, we see an entirely different face, a leader full of courage, a heart unshaken by adversity, a woman who dared to take on a responsibility that, by tradition, only men would have assumed. The lesson left behind by that battle is not just for the Tudor era, but for all of us today. That strength does not lie in gender or status, but in courage and the ability to face challenges. When pushed into adversity, you can fall, but you can also rise and shine. Catherine chose the second path, and because of that, her name is still remembered to this day. The Battle of Flodden in 1513 ended not only with the victory of the English, but also with the birth of a symbol. In that historical moment, Catherine of Aragon stepped out of the shadow of a typical queen to become a figure that made the entire nation hold its head high. She did not need to don armor for battle, nor did she need to wield a sword on the battlefield, but the power she radiated protected an entire kingdom. And it is that quiet strength that is what makes Catherine's name resonate to this day. Looking back at this story, we realize that history is not only written by kings or generals who lead armies. Sometimes it is shaped by those who seem weak but possess unbreakable will. Catherine did not fight with weapons. She fought with faith and the ability to inspire unity. That is what made one of the most significant victories of the Tudor dynasty. And now, the question for all of us. Does Catherine of Aragon deserve to be considered one of the greatest leaders of the Tudor family? Leave your thoughts, for it is this very debate that will make history come alive and become more relatable. Thank you for following until the end, and if this story moved you, don't forget to support the History Channel to continue exploring mysteries, battles, and figures who shaped an entire era. This is just the beginning, and many surprising stories await you ahead. There is an image that surprises many. Henry VIII, the king who once symbolized power and strength in the final years of his life, was no longer the young man full of vitality. He had become obese, plagued by illness, and his legs were so painful that he could barely move. Yet, despite his condition, Henry still decided to lead an army across the sea to conquer France. A king who seemed destined to rest in his palace donned armor and went to war, and the Boulogne campaign of 1544 became the final chapter in his life, full of ambition and contradictions. What drove Henry VIII, in his old age, to risk both his health and the national treasury in such a luxurious war? Was it merely the desire for one last moment of glory, or the obsession with leaving an indelible mark before his death? This question continues to fuel debates among historians to this day. Welcome back to the History Channel. Today, we will explore a campaign that is rarely mentioned, but reveals a clear picture of Henry VIII in his final years. This is not only a story about a port city named Boulogne, but also a story about pride, the thirst for power, and the price to pay when a king places his personal reputation above the prosperity of his nation. Was this victory truly worth it, or just a vanity project to satisfy Henry VIII's ego? The answer lies within the tumultuous journey of Boulogne 1544. In 1544, Europe was a complex political chessboard where alliances and agreements could change overnight. Henry VIII, who had ruled for nearly 4 decades, did not want to be seen as an aging king slowly fading into the shadows. He yearned to prove that England still had the strength to stand alongside the great powers of the continent. It was also the time he allied with Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor, to open a front against France, their longtime enemy. In Henry's eyes, this was not merely a war, but an opportunity to engrave his name into European history. However, behind the political maneuvers lay an England burdened by heavy taxes. The treasury, already drained by extravagant projects and previous wars, now had to finance a large-scale military campaign. The people complained and the nobles hesitated, but Henry remained steadfast. He believed that glory would overshadow all sacrifices and that victory would justify all the hopes placed on the venture. In this context, Boulogne, a strategic port city of France, became the primary target. If he could capture Boulogne, Henry would not only control an important gateway to the English Channel, but also prove that even age and illness could not stop him from achieving military success. And from these calculations, an ambitious campaign began, promising both glory and tragedy. In the summer of 1544, the English army crossed the Channel into France, carrying with them both confidence and the heavy expectations of Henry VIII. Their destination was Boulogne, a fortified port city located on the shores of the Channel, considered the key to controlling the trade and military route between the two coasts. As the English arrived, a sense of urgency enveloped the city. The French people and the defenders knew they had become the primary target of a king's final ambition. The siege began in July. The English built fortifications, dug trenches, and deployed heavy artillery. Cannons roared day and night, aiming directly at the walls of Boulogne, while English soldiers continued to tighten the noose. The French tried to resist, but against the persistence and overwhelming power of the enemy, each wall and defense line gradually collapsed. Fear spread throughout the city as supplies ran low, and the morale of the soldiers deteriorated. By September, after weeks of resistance, Boulogne was forced to surrender. The English flag flew over the city, and Henry VIII, despite his failing health, was present to witness the moment of victory. But as he basked in glory, a bitter truth awaited him. His ally Charles V, instead of continuing to stand by him, suddenly signed a separate peace treaty with France, leaving England to stand alone. Thus, the victory at Boulogne was both glorious and tinged with isolation, signaling the heavy price that would be paid in the years to come. Henry VIII's appearance at Boulogne was far from the familiar image of a young king who once dominated the battlefield. By this time, he was old, overweight, plagued by illness, and his legs were so painful that he could barely move, yet his eyes still sparkled with the determination of a warrior. It was this very presence that made the entire army feel they were fighting for the honor of a king who refused to bow to age or adversity. For Henry, the Boulogne campaign was his final opportunity to prove to the world that he was still the king of steel and blood, not an old man on the verge of collapse. At the moment Boulogne fell, Henry VIII achieved the victory he had longed for. He saw the English flag flying over the port city, and in his mind, this was the eternal mark of the Tudor dynasty under his rule. But at the same time, the contradictions within him were evident. Henry wanted glory for himself, but he also knew that the price was an emptied treasury and a people burdened with taxes. He chose to accept this because, for Henry, nothing was more important than his everlasting reputation. Thus, the Boulogne campaign perfectly illustrated Henry VIII in the final years of his life. Proud, stubborn, willing to challenge his own limits, yet deeply conflicted as his ego overshadowed the national interest. This was both his strength and his weakness, the dual nature of one of England's most famous kings. The Boulogne campaign granted Henry VIII a brief moment of glory, but history has shown that this victory was not a complete one. The important port city fell into English hands, but it resembled more of a vain trophy than a foundation for long-term prosperity. Less than 6 years later, Boulogne was returned to France in exchange for a ransom. All that remained was the memory of the final triumph of a king who placed his ego above the nation's welfare. For England, Boulogne was not the beginning of expansion, but a testament to the heavy cost of ambition. The treasury, already drained, became further depleted, the people burdened with heavy taxes, while the only pride they received was a temporary city under the English flag. This campaign showed that victory on the battlefield does not always translate into victory in history. What matters is not how much land is gained, but whether a nation can maintain stability and sustainability. Boulogne thus serves as a profound lesson for all eras. A leader can use power to win victories, but if the long-term future of the nation is neglected, those victories will eventually fade away. Henry VIII etched his name in history with Boulogne, but also left behind a question without an answer. Was the brief glory worth the price that the entire country had to pay? The Boulogne campaign of 1544 ended as the clearest mirror of Henry VIII in his later years. He gained a victory, but that victory was as fragile as an illusion. It satisfied the pride of a king eager to leave a mark, but it left the country in ruin. Boulogne did not become a symbol of territorial expansion, but a proof of an ambition that was both grand and blind. And it was there that we saw the contradiction within Henry, a warrior who refused to succumb to old age, but also a king whose ego overshadowed the common good. For history, Boulogne is not just a city that was captured and then returned, but a story about the true value of victory. A victory can bring fame to an individual, but if it burdens the nation, can it truly be considered a victory? Henry VIII chose his path, and he carved his name into history with both glory and mistakes. This is the complexity that makes his image both admired and controversial. The final question we must ask ourselves is, if you were in Henry VIII's shoes, would you be willing to sacrifice the stability of the nation for a victory bearing your name? Leave your thoughts below, as differing viewpoints will make history come to life. And if you want to continue exploring that few know, join us at the History Channel, where many mysteries are waiting to be uncovered. There was a woman once praised as the jewel of Europe, a bridge for the powerful alliance between England and Spain, who later became the focal point of a historical storm that shook both religion and politics across Europe. She was Catherine of Aragon, the first wife of Henry VIII. From a Spanish princess carrying the pride of royal blood, Catherine stepped into England with the expectation of bringing prosperity, peace, and a glorious future to the Tudor dynasty. However, her fate took a tragic turn, from a beloved queen to being abandoned by her own husband, and her name became associated with one of the greatest crises in European history, the divorce that changed England's religion forever. What caused such a noble-born woman with virtues unparalleled to become a symbol of injustice and suffering? Why did a beautiful love story end in a bitter separation, turning Catherine into a figure both pitied and respected? Welcome back to the History Channel. Today we will delve into the story of Catherine of Aragon, not just to witness the suffering she endured, but also to understand why she is still regarded as one of England's most resilient and courageous queens. This is not just a tale of love and betrayal, but a reminder of the power of loyalty, faith, and a heart that never yielded. Catherine of Aragon was born in 1485, the youngest daughter of two of Europe's most powerful monarchs, Ferdinand II of Aragon and Isabella I of Castile, the rulers who completed the unification of Spain. From a young age, Catherine was raised in a strict environment where Catholic faith was paramount and loyalty to the family was considered sacred. She learned Latin, studied the Bible, and honed the qualities of a royal woman: intelligence, patience, and pride. However, Catherine's life was not meant to be peaceful. At the age of 16, she was married off to Prince Arthur, the eldest son of Henry VII of England. This marriage was not just to unite two individuals, but also to strengthen the diplomatic ties between two powerful dynasties. For Catherine, England became her second home, a place where she hoped to fulfill her mission, to serve as a bridge for a prosperous new era. Little did she know, this arrangement would mark the beginning of a life filled with great tragedy. Catherine arrived in England believing she would have a happy marriage to Prince Arthur, the Tudor heir to the throne. But after just a few short months, fate struck with brutal force. Arthur died at the age of 15, leaving Catherine widowed at the age of 16, alone in a foreign land. From a princess celebrated as a symbol of a mighty alliance, she became a figure abandoned amidst political calculations, unsure of what her future held. The years that followed were long and challenging. Catherine had to live in constant waiting, bearing financial pressures while caught between the courts of England and Spain. Yet it was during these dark days that she showed an extraordinary resilience. Catherine did not falter, nor did she allow herself to be forgotten. She held on to the dignity of a royal princess. Eventually, fate smiled upon her once more when she was married to Henry, Arthur's younger brother. From that point, Catherine's life entered a new chapter, bringing both glory and even greater tragedies ahead. When Catherine of Aragon became the wife of Henry VIII and was crowned Queen of England, she entered the most glorious period of her life. Not only did she possess a gentle beauty and unwavering faith, but she also demonstrated intelligence and strength far beyond the image of a wife standing behind the throne. Catherine quickly won the affection of the people, who saw in her a compassionate, approachable queen dedicated to her country. What made her even more remarkable was that Catherine did not merely exist in the palace, but also left her mark on history. When Henry VIII went to France, she was entrusted with regency, bearing the responsibility of running the kingdom. In the Battle of Flodden in 1513, she was the one who organized the forces, encouraged the soldiers, and played a key role in the resounding victory over Scotland. The image of a young queen donning armor and sending it to her husband as a war trophy became a powerful symbol of her courage and intellect. She was not only a symbol of gentleness, but also an embodiment of strength and faith, a queen worthy of admiration from the entire nation. However, the marriage between Catherine and Henry VIII, which once seemed unbreakable, began to crack when she failed to provide the king with a surviving male heir to the throne. Repeated miscarriages and the early deaths of their children became a persistent pain, not only for Catherine, but also a pretext for Henry to turn away from her. While Catherine persevered in her duties as a queen, Henry became increasingly obsessed with the desire for a male heir and sought love elsewhere. When Anne Boleyn appeared on the scene, Henry was determined to annul their nearly 2-decade-long marriage. Catherine refused to relent, refusing to accept being regarded as an illegitimate wife, and even more so, refusing to allow her daughter Mary to be stripped of her royal rights. Her struggle was not only for love, but for honor and the Catholic faith she held dear. It was her steadfastness that drove Henry to break away from the Pope, initiating the English Reformation that forever altered the course of England's history. What started as a personal tragedy for Catherine turned into the spark for a seismic shift that would affect all of Europe. After her marriage to Henry VIII was officially annulled, Catherine of Aragon was stripped of her title as queen and confined to remote castles. She was forbidden to see her beloved daughter Mary and was not allowed to attend any court ceremonies. However, in the face of solitude and illness, Catherine maintained the dignity of a Spanish princess and an English queen. She signed her final letters with the title Catherine, Queen of England, as a way to assert that the title had never truly left her. In the final years of her life, Catherine's health deteriorated quickly, but her religious faith remained the foundation that allowed her to face her fate with calm. On January 7th, 1536, she passed away at the age of 50, mourned by the people, those who had never stopped seeing her as the true queen. Catherine was buried simply at Peterborough Cathedral, but her memory lived on in the hearts of the people as an image of steadfastness, loyalty, and unwavering virtue. Catherine of Aragon left a unique legacy in history, one that extends far beyond the title of a queen abandoned by her husband. She became a symbol of steadfastness and loyalty, not only to her Catholic faith, but also to her role in English history. Despite being stripped of her title, Catherine maintained her dignity until the end, leaving behind the image of a woman who refused to bow to power or injustice. Catherine's resilience serves as a reminder of the quiet strength of those who might appear weak. She did not fight with swords, but she triumphed through patience and unwavering belief. In the eyes of the people, she never lost her title as queen, and it is this affection that has allowed her name to live on through the ages. Her legacy is not only the prelude to the great upheavals in England, but also a humanitarian lesson for all generations. There are values greater than power, and victories are not always found on thrones, but in maintaining one's integrity amidst life's storms. The story of Catherine of Aragon concludes not simply as the journey of a queen abandoned by her husband, but as the journey of a woman who lived wholeheartedly with faith, honor, and love for her country and family. Though removed from the throne, Catherine never surrendered. She maintained her dignity until her last breath, leaving behind the image of a woman both gentle and resolute, full of compassion and stronger than any weapon. Her silent pride, refusal to succumb to injustice, and absolute loyalty to her faith ensured that Catherine's name transcended time. She was not only a queen of the 16th century, but belongs to all generations to come, as a reminder that dignity and character are things no one can strip away. Catherine may have lost everything in Henry VIII's hands, but she triumphed in the hearts of future generations, and that is the most lasting victory. The profound lesson from Catherine of Aragon is, in life, we cannot control how others treat us, but we can always control how we choose to face it. Power, money, or love can be lost, but character and steadfastness are what endure. Applied to the present, any of us will face moments of failure, rejection, or injustice. We must learn to hold firm to our values, never losing faith or self-respect. It is this that creates immortality in each person's life. What do you think? Is Catherine of Aragon the most memorable wife of Henry VIII? Leave your answer in the comments so everyone can share their views. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel to support History Channel and motivate us to bring you more fascinating historical stories next time. There are names in history that are remembered not for victories or greatness, but for the terror and fear they left behind. Mary I, the daughter of Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon, is one such figure. When she ascended to the throne in 1553, many believed it would mark the beginning of a new era, with England gaining its first legitimate queen. But just a few years later, the entire nation trembled as they referred to her by a nickname that sent shivers down the spine: Bloody Mary, a name tied to blood, fire, and horrific executions. History remembers Mary as a brutal ruler, but have we ever asked ourselves, what transformed a once ignored princess, a woman who suffered an unhappy childhood, into a queen willing to burn hundreds of people alive simply because of religious beliefs? Was it cold cruelty, or the tragedy of a woman pushed to extremes by past wounds and the weight of the crown? Welcome back to Channel History. In this episode, we will dive deep into the life of Mary I, from a dark childhood to a brief but blood-soaked reign, and finally, the controversial legacy she left behind. This is a story not only about a queen, but about pain, obsession, and the terrible price of power. Mary I was born in 1516 as the only surviving child of Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon. As a young girl, she was loved by her parents, raised as a legitimate princess with sharp intellect and strong religious convictions inherited from her mother. But that happiness was short-lived. When Henry VIII decided to divorce Catherine to marry Anne Boleyn, Mary's world shattered. She was stripped of her title as princess, regarded as an illegitimate child, forced to separate from her beloved mother and subjected to the control of the stepmother she despised. These formative years left deep scars in Mary's soul. From a child who was once adored, she became one who lived in isolation, constantly fighting to maintain her faith and loyalty to her mother. The insecurity, shame, and isolation she endured forged a Mary who was tough, proud, but also vulnerable. She did not simply grow into a queen. She grew into a woman haunted by the need to prove her worth in a world that always sought to deny her. After the death of Edward VI, the English throne was thrown into chaos. Powerful figures in the court sought to crown Lady Jane Grey, a 16-year-old girl, with the hope of making her a puppet ruler. But Mary, who had spent her life being humiliated and disregarded, would not accept this. She gathered support from nobles and commoners alike, for in their eyes, Mary was the legitimate daughter of Henry VIII, the true heir to the throne. The overthrow of Jane Grey happened swiftly and dramatically. In just 9 days, Jane was deposed, and Mary entered London to the cheers of the crowd. That moment marked the greatest victory of her life. From being seen as illegitimate, Mary reclaimed her rightful place and became England's first legally reigning queen. But that joy was only the beginning of harsh trials. Mary not only had to prove her ability to rule in a male-dominated world, but she also faced the impending religious conflict that was about to explode. And from that throne, her destiny was about to turn to a chapter filled with bloodshed. When Mary ascended to the throne, what she desired most was not power or wealth, but the restoration of Catholic faith, a belief she had been nurtured with since childhood and had witnessed being trampled upon during the reign of her father and brother. As soon as she had the chance, Mary began to reverse the previous reforms, bringing the Pope back as the head of the Church of England. For Mary, this was not just a policy, but a sacred mission to cleanse the stains of the past and prove herself as the legitimate princess of Catherine of Aragon. However, this unwavering faith turned her reign into one filled with blood and fire. Hundreds of Protestant believers were imprisoned. Many prominent scholars and clergymen were burned at the stake. The fiery flames in Smithfield and Oxford spread fear throughout the country, leaving the people with horrifying memories. It was then that the nickname Bloody Mary was born, forever tied to her name. To those loyal to Catholicism, Mary was a brave queen. But to the majority, she became a symbol of cruelty. And it is here that the image of Mary Y is forever stained with tragedy and controversy. Mary Y believed that one of her greatest responsibilities as queen was to secure an heir to strengthen the throne and guarantee the future of England. For this reason, she chose to marry Philip II of Spain, hoping that the marriage would not only bring a strong political alliance, but also give her the opportunity to become a mother. At that time, Mary was over 30, and her yearning to have children had become an obsession. But this marriage quickly turned into a disappointment. Philip did not truly love Mary. He was cold, distant, and saw the marriage only as a political tool. Meanwhile, Mary believed several times that she was pregnant, her belly growing, with the entire court waiting for a prince to be born. However, it was all a false pregnancy, leaving an unbearable pain. For Mary, it was not only a personal failure, but also a deep wound to the entire dynasty. Her longing to be a mother, combined with the loneliness in her marriage, made Mary increasingly insecure and tough in her decisions. She became a woman who fought not only against political enemies, but also with the emptiness in her heart. Mary I's reign lasted only 5 years, but it was filled with heavy disappointments. She not only failed to produce an heir, but also witnessed England losing Calais, the last remaining piece of French land, once a symbol of national pride. Upon hearing the news, Mary exclaimed, "When I die, let it be engraved on my heart, Calais." These words reflected the deep pain and regret of a queen who had failed to preserve a legacy for her country. In the final years of her life, Mary's health rapidly declined. The illness weakened her further, while her soul sank into loneliness. Philip II grew distant. Many in the court turned away, and the people resented her harsh religious policies. On November 17, 1558, Mary passed away at the age of 42, leaving the throne to her half-sister, Elizabeth I. Mary's death marked the end of a short and tragic reign. She passed away without children, without love, and without the trust of her subjects, All that remained was a name forever linked to blood and tears. The legacy of Mary Foz remains a topic of intense debate. To many, she is remembered as a brutal queen, earning the nickname Bloody Mary, which is forever associated with blood and fear. But if we look deeper, we see a woman torn apart by the pain of her childhood, by an unshakable religious faith, and by a desperate desire to assert her rightful place. She wasn't just a bloodthirsty ruler, she was a woman carrying the weight of history, trying to restore what she believed to be justice. Mary also opened the door for women to ascend to the English throne, even though her reign was short and tragic. Her existence paved the way for Elizabeth I's future success, and from there, history witnessed one of the greatest queens in England's history. So despite the shadow that covered Mary's image, she left an indelible mark on history. The story of Mary serves as a reminder that power, when not accompanied by compassion, can become a double-edged sword. And sometimes, personal wounds can shape an entire era, leaving lessons for generations to come. Mary I's story ends like a tragedy, the echoes of which continue to resonate throughout history. She is not remembered as a queen who brought peace, nor as a shrewd leader who led England to prosperity, but as the woman known as Bloody Mary, a cold name forever linked to blood and fear. However, if we only view her through that lens, we miss the truth that Mary was also a human being filled with wounds and desires. She longed for recognition, yearned to uphold the faith passed down from her mother, and dreamed of having a family and an heir to continue the dynasty. These seemingly simple desires, when caught in the whirlwind of power, turned into a terrible burden that made her a symbol of cruelty. Mary I stands as proof of the truth that power can lift a person to the throne, but it can also crush their heart. She was both the perpetrator of brutal persecutions and the victim of her circumstances and fate. It is this contradiction that makes Mary's image unforgettable, a haunting presence in history. Looking back, Mary reminds us that the true strength of a leader lies not only in willpower, but also in compassion and the ability to heal. When these qualities are lacking, even the noblest aspirations can turn into a stain on history. So, what do you think? Does Mary Wad truly deserve the title Bloody Mary, or was she simply a victim of her time? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to Channel History so we continue exploring more captivating yet haunting historical stories in the episodes ahead. There are individuals born into turmoil, seemingly destined to be buried by history, only to rise and become eternal symbols. Elizabeth I is one such figure. When she was born in 1533, she was not welcomed as a hope for the Tudor dynasty, but as a disappointment. Her father, Henry VIII, longed for a prince to inherit the throne, but her mother, Anne Boleyn, gave birth to a girl. Just 2 years later, her mother was executed, and Elizabeth was stripped of her title as princess, marked as an legitimate child. In the eyes of many, she had no worth except as a political pawn, a shadow in the treacherous court. However, it was from this barren land that Elizabeth grew strong. She learned to observe, to remain silent when needed, and to survive in times when a single mistake could lead to death. No one could have predicted that the girl who had been looked down upon would rise to become one of the greatest queens in human history. Welcome back to Channel History. Today, we will explore the journey of Elizabeth I, from the rejected child to the legendary Virgin Queen who ushered in England's glorious Golden Age. This story will not only astonish you, but also make you ask yourself, what made this solitary woman, full of pride and strength, so extraordinarily powerful? Elizabeth I was born in a magnificent palace, but her childhood was full of irreparable cracks. When Elizabeth was just 2 years old, her mother, Anne Boleyn, was executed for treason. From that moment, Elizabeth lost both her mother and her title as princess, becoming a child viewed with suspicion by the very court that once adored her. She was no longer a symbol of hope, but simply a name beyond the love of her father and the trust of power. Yet, instead of succumbing, Elizabeth learned to grow in silence. She immersed herself in books, learning many languages, studying politics and philosophy, training herself to be different from what people had labeled her. Her childhood, overshadowed by fear and loneliness, became the foundation for a resilient spirit and a sharp intellect. Elizabeth knew that to survive in a world full of betrayal and cold-heartedness, she had to know when to hide and when to shine. And from those dark days, a queen with iron will was born. The path that led Elizabeth to the throne was not lined with roses, but rather a journey of life and death. After the death of Edward VI, her half-sister Mary Thirst ascended the throne. In Mary's eyes, Elizabeth, a Protestant, was always a covert threat. She was imprisoned in the Tower of London, a place where countless people entered and never returned. A single accusation of treason could cost Elizabeth her life at any moment, but she remained steadfast, cautious, and skillfully survived through those dark years. When Mary died in 1558, Elizabeth emerged from the shadows and took the crown amid the joy of the people. From a girl once looked down upon, she became the hope of a nation torn by division and unrest. That moment was not just her coronation, but the beginning of a great mission: to heal a fractured country and lead it into a new era. Elizabeth understood that the throne she held was not just glory, but a responsibility that came at the cost of blood, tears, and solitude. When Elizabeth I ascended to the throne, she faced a deeply divided nation. Religious conflict simmered like an ember, ready to erupt into a storm at any moment. Catholics saw her as an usurper, while Protestants placed their hopes in her protection. A single misstep could cost her the throne, or even her life. Not only within England, but powerful foreign forces like Spain and France also eyed the country, seeing England as a weak prey to be devoured. In such a precarious situation, Elizabeth chose the path of compromise. She was neither extreme nor weak, but skillfully established a flexible religious foundation, just enough to reassure the Protestants, while not entirely severing ties with Catholicism. This decision not only secured her throne, but also laid the groundwork for long-term stability in the nation. The pressure weighed heavily on the shoulders of this solitary woman, but Elizabeth turned the challenge into an opportunity. She proved to both her people and her enemies that she was no mere puppet queen, but a leader capable of steering England's ship through turbulent waters. Elizabeth I understood that to hold the throne, she needed diplomacy over brute force. Domestically, she built an image of a strong yet approachable queen, using intelligence and resilience to win the hearts of her people. She encouraged trade, expanded maritime endeavors, and created opportunities for explorers to take England to the world. The economy began to prosper, and the people's trust in the throne grew. In foreign relations, Elizabeth did not seek direct confrontation, but expertly balanced the power dynamics between major European nations. Spain and France loomed as constant threats, but she used marriage as a political tool, extending negotiations without binding herself. She chose to maintain the title of Virgin Queen, turning it into a symbol of independence and power rather than of vulnerability. Her clear-headedness helped keep England steadfast in a Europe full of turmoil. She proved that without a male king and without a political marriage, England could still be led by the intellect, willpower, and vision of a resilient woman. In 1588, England faced its greatest test during Elizabeth's reign: the mighty Spanish Armada, the most formidable naval force in Europe at the time. To many, the prospect of failure seemed inevitable, as the English Navy was smaller and far less experienced. But in that moment of danger, Elizabeth became the flame that ignited the national spirit. She rode out to the troops at Tilbury and declared, "I have the body of a weak woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king, and of a king of England too." Her words resonated, inspiring confidence in her troops. With strategic brilliance, the English fleet utilized small, agile ships and took advantage of adverse weather conditions to defeat the massive Armada. The battle ended in a resounding victory, not only saving England from invasion, but also elevating the nation's status from a small kingdom to a maritime superpower. The victory over Spain was not just a battle, it was a testament to Elizabeth's will and exceptional leadership. She didn't just defend her throne. She etched her name into history as a queen of courage and conviction. The victory over the Spanish Armada ushered in a new era for England, known as the Golden Age under the reign of Elizabeth I. It was a period where the nation not only grew strong militarily, but also shone in culture, the arts, and national spirit. The theater became a center of creativity, with figures like William Shakespeare and Christopher Marlowe illuminating the literary world, leaving masterpieces that still resonate today. Not only in the arts, but maritime exploration and trade also flourished. The voyages of Francis Drake and Walter Raleigh opened new pathways for England's influence to expand across the world. In the eyes of the people, Elizabeth was not just a reigning queen, but a symbol of confidence, pride, and the desire to conquer. Under Elizabeth's reign, the English for the first time felt that their small country could stand alongside the great empires of Europe. It was not just a time of accomplishments, but also a moment when England discovered its identity, a united, creative nation, ready to step into the new age. In the later years of Elizabeth I's life, the brilliance of her reign began to fade. Despite being hailed as the Virgin Queen and a symbol of national strength, beneath her proud exterior lay a quiet loneliness. Without a husband or children, Elizabeth sacrificed personal happiness to maintain the independence of the throne. Yet this choice left her with long, empty nights, as the court slowly saw fewer close companions. As she grew older, Elizabeth became increasingly withdrawn. She avoided looking in mirrors, not wanting to see the image of a queen past her prime. She tried to maintain a strong image in front of her people, but inside, she was haunted by the fear of her eventual departure and the void she would leave behind. When she passed away in 1603, England mourned a queen who had led them through their greatest period of glory, but the sense of loss was palpable as the Tudor dynasty came to an end. Elizabeth closed her life as she had lived it, proud, determined, but also profoundly lonely. And it is this contradiction that makes her story one of the most haunting and memorable in history, securing her place as one of the greatest figures in history. The legacy Elizabeth I left behind transcends the time in which she reigned. She not only held the throne through turbulent years, but also transformed England into a rising power, confidently standing alongside the great empires of Europe. Her era, known as the Golden Age, is remembered not only for military victories and economic prosperity, but also for the flourishing of art, culture, and the spirit of exploration. Elizabeth created a new national identity for the English people, one tied to pride, discipline, and the ambition to reach beyond their shores. More importantly, Elizabeth became a symbol of the strength of women in a world dominated by male-dominated views. She proved that intelligence and resilience could be more important than bloodline or gender. The image of the Virgin Queen was not just a political strategy, but a declaration of independence and pride from a woman who chose to place her country above her personal happiness. Today, when we speak of Elizabeth I, we do not just remember a queen, but an eternal symbol, a testament that even in the face of adversity, unwavering willpower can alter the fate of an entire nation. The story of Elizabeth I closes like a melody, both tragic and brilliant. From a child once seen as illegitimate, she became one of the greatest queens in human history. She reigned for nearly half a century, leading the nation through peril, laying the foundation for a prosperous age, and instilling a national pride that had never before been felt. Elizabeth proved that the true power of a leader lies not in blood or gender, but in vision, intellect, and determination. Yet beneath that glory was a woman filled with loneliness, sacrificing personal happiness for the enduring strength of the nation. This paradox makes the image of Elizabeth I so haunting, a great queen, but also a woman who carried the most empty spaces within her. Perhaps it is these contrasts that made her a legend, an icon that transcends time. Elizabeth I is not just a chapter in history, she is a mirror of resilience and will. She leaves us with a lesson. In any adversity, as long as we hold on to faith and determination, we can rewrite our fate and the fate of our nation. So do you think Elizabeth I is the greatest monarch in the Tudor dynasty? Or was she simply a fortunate woman who happened to be in the right place at the right time in history? Share your thoughts in the comments so everyone can discuss. And if you enjoy these emotional and dramatic historical stories, don't forget to subscribe to Channel History to support the channel. Your continued support will motivate us to keep bringing exciting episodes, unraveling mysteries, and exploring the tragedies that have shaken the world. Henry Fitzroy's story is one that often remains shrouded in mystery and regret, a poignant what if in the annals of English history. Born in 1519 as the result of a secret affair between Henry VIII and Elizabeth Blount, a young lady in waiting at court, Fitzroy was not the heir to the throne, but he was the king's legitimate son, an unusual and unexpected position in a time when illegitimate children were typically forgotten or dismissed. However, Fitzroy was different, and Henry VIII, deeply obsessed with having a male heir, openly acknowledged him, giving him the title Fitzroy, meaning son of the king. This recognition, a bold statement against the strict norms of the Tudor court, set him apart from other children born outside marriage. From the moment of his birth, Fitzroy was destined for greatness. He was not just a child, he was a symbol of Henry VIII's deepest longing, a living proof that the king could produce a healthy male heir. Henry's public acknowledgement of his son transformed Fitzroy into a focal point in the court, with both allies and enemies watching his every move with curiosity and caution. Though he was born out of wedlock, Fitzroy was granted privileges that most children, even those born legitimately, could never dream of. Unlike many other illegitimate children, Fitzroy's future looked bright. As a teenager, he was granted high titles and responsibilities, titles like Duke of Richmond and Somerset, roles within important councils, all of which were usually reserved for the most senior of nobles. These titles were not only marks of a father's affection for his son, but also Henry VIII's way of asserting to the court that Fitzroy was a figure of power in his own right. In a world where the legitimacy of birth was of utmost importance, this recognition made Fitzroy a potential successor to the throne, a living symbol of hope for the king's dynasty. But Fitzroy's existence also caused unease among many at court. His rise to power threatened to destabilize the already fragile political environment. Though still young, Fitzroy was under intense scrutiny, seen as a potential heir to the throne, especially if the king's legitimate sons, Edward VI and the future Mary, failed to produce male heirs. His very existence was enough to unsettle those around him, with some fearing that his claim could challenge the established order. Growing up surrounded by the swirling currents of power, Fitzroy embodied the duality of possibility and peril. His position as the son of Henry VIII came with not only the promise of royal legacy, but also the potential to reshape the course of history. Yet as a young man, his fate was uncertain, and despite the hope he represented for his father, Fitzroy's life was cut tragically short. In 1536, just after turning 17, Fitzroy died unexpectedly, leaving behind a royal dynasty that remained unfulfilled in its desperate need for a male heir. His death sent ripples through the court and dashed any hopes that the king's long-awaited son might one day take the throne. The life and death of Henry Fitzroy are haunting in their untold potential. His existence raised questions about legitimacy, lineage, and the twists of fate that shaped the course of history. Had Fitzroy lived longer, the Tudor dynasty might have taken a very different turn, potentially altering the course of England's future. Yet, as history often reveals, the death of Fitzroy left England without the male heir it so desperately needed, leaving the Tudor legacy to continue through Henry's only surviving legitimate child, Edward VI. Fitzroy's short life is a poignant reminder of how the fate of nations can hinge on the briefest of moments. Had he survived, he might have been the key to securing the future of the Tudor dynasty. Instead, his legacy is one of what could have been, a tragic what if in the story of England's monarchy. This tale of a prince who never was, of a son denied the opportunity to fulfill his potential, lingers in the historical consciousness as a powerful reminder of the complexities of royal succession and the human cost of a monarchy obsessed with legacy and heirs. Henry VIII was forever haunted by his obsession with having a male heir to ensure the continuation of the Tudor dynasty. Each day without a legitimate prince only deepened his anxiety. Amidst this, Henry Fitzroy, though born out of wedlock, became the king's greatest hope. The boy proved to be healthy, lively, and different from the disappointments Henry had faced in his marriages. At one point, rumors began to circulate within the court that the king had considered placing Fitzroy in the line of succession. In Henry's eyes, the throne could not remain vacant simply due to a legal barrier. Some members of parliament even supported this idea, seeing Fitzroy as a safe solution in a time of uncertainty. This demonstrated that Fitzroy's existence was not just a personal pride for Henry VIII, but a reflection of his deepest insecurity. The fear of losing the Tudor legacy that he had fought so hard to build. Fitzroy, therefore, was not just a son. He was a fragile symbol of hope, a temporary answer to a king desperate to leave an immortal mark through his bloodline. When Henry Fitzroy was only 14, he was arranged to marry Mary Howard, the daughter of the Duke of Norfolk, one of the most powerful families in England. For Henry VIII, this was not a simple youthful marriage, but a calculated political move aimed at securing Fitzroy's position, making him a central figure in the web of power. This marriage was seen as a statement that Fitzroy was not just an illegitimate son, but could become a key player in the future of the dynasty. However, both Fitzroy and Mary were still too young, and they had no children. The union seemed more like a political tool than a genuine family bond. Yet, it showed that Henry VIII had high expectations for this special son, viewing him as a guarantee to maintain the strength of the Tudor dynasty. For Fitzroy, the marriage was a clear sign that his fate was never truly his own. Every step, every decision he made was bound by the machinery of politics, where even private happiness was merely a tool to bolster the throne. In 1536, at just 17 years old, Henry Fitzroy's life was cut short. His death, thought to be due to tuberculosis, left him weakened and unable to recover. For the court, it was a devastating shock, but for Henry VIII, it was the deepest sorrow. He had lost the only publicly acknowledged son, a living testament to his hope for a male heir. Fitzroy's death was not only a family tragedy, but also a blow to the future of the Tudor dynasty. The rumors about placing Fitzroy in the line of succession dissipated like smoke. A door that had once opened with hope was now shut, leaving an overwhelming sense of insecurity over the entire kingdom. Fitzroy left this world far too young, without leaving any mark other than being the king's son. But it was this brevity that made his name a symbol for what could have been. The history of the Tudors will forever remember Fitzroy as an important piece of the puzzle, though he never had the opportunity to complete the picture. The early death of Henry Fitzroy left a significant gap in the history of the Tudor dynasty. Although he lived only 17 years, he became a symbol of Henry VIII's obsession and burning desire for a male heir. Fitzroy never ascended to the throne, but his existence made it clear that the king was willing to break all traditional rules to protect his bloodline. Had Fitzroy lived longer, English history might have taken a different course. He could have been a legitimate successor, especially at a time when Henry VIII had no legal sons for many years. However, fate did not give him the chance, leaving behind an unsolved question. This is why Fitzroy is remembered not for grand achievements, but for the weight of what could have been. Fitzroy's legacy is not tied to the throne, but to the message of the fragility of power. In the calculating world of the Tudors, even a son officially recognized by the king could not escape the harshness of fate. The story of Fitzroy reminds us that some people are born merely to etch regret into history. The story of Henry Fitzroy ends like an unfinished song, both tragic and filled with regret. He was the only son of Henry VIII to be acknowledged, a testament that the king could produce a healthy male heir for the Tudor dynasty. Yet fate was cruel, taking Fitzroy's life at such a young age, leaving an irreplaceable void in Henry VIII's heart and in the history of England. Fitzroy never had the chance to become king, nor to leave his mark through great conquests or reforms. However, his presence shaped many important decisions made by Henry VIII. Fitzroy's death intensified the king's fear of lacking a legitimate heir, leading him down the path of changing his marriages and religion, sparking events that would alter the face of England forever. What makes Fitzroy memorable is not his power or achievements, but the question that remains: if he had lived longer, would history have been different? Could a king born out of wedlock, yet trusted by his father, have changed the fate of the Tudor dynasty? It is these unfinished possibilities that make the story of Fitzroy haunting to this day. So, do you think Henry Fitzroy deserved to become King of England if he hadn't died young? Share your thoughts in the comments so we can discuss. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel to support us as we continue to bring you thrilling and unexpected historical stories in the upcoming episodes. There are names in history that are not remembered for greatness, but for a tragedy so brief that it haunts. Catherine Howard, the fifth wife of Henry VIII, is one such name. She was just a 17-year-old girl when she stepped onto the throne, hailed by the entire court as a symbol of youth, beauty, and vitality that the aging king desired. But in the blink of an eye, from the height of queenship, Catherine fell straight into the abyss of disgrace, betrayal, and the painful death on the scaffold. What turned an innocent girl into the center of a Tudor tragedy? Was Catherine merely a victim of youthful impulsiveness, or was she truly involved in a dark political conspiracy orchestrated by the Howard family? That question makes her story an enigma that has never ceased to provoke debate. Welcome back to Channel History. Today we will embark on the journey of Catherine Howard, from an unknown girl to queen, only to end her life before reaching the age of 19. This is not just a story of love, power, and betrayal, but also a brutal reminder that in the Tudor court, a single wrong step could cost one's life. Was Catherine the bold mastermind or merely a small pawn in the ruthless game of power? Let's search for the answer. Catherine Howard was born into a noble family, but one that was not wealthy. Her parents left her to be raised by the Howard family, and from an early age, Catherine lived in the house of the Duke of Norfolk. It was not a strict environment, but one filled with indulgence. The young girls there grew up with little supervision, often engaging in frivolous activities, and Catherine became caught up in that whirlwind. Her childhood was not glorious, not meticulously cared for like a noblewoman, but filled with a blend of innocence and impulsiveness. It was during these years that Catherine had misguided romantic relationships, leaving marks that were hard to erase. These secrets, which seemed to be merely youthful mistakes, would become the fateful chains that bound her to tragedy later on. A major turning point occurred when Catherine was brought to the court to become a lady-in-waiting to Queen Anne of Cleves. In the royal court, her beauty and youth shone brightly. No one expected that the girl who had been forgotten in a poor family would catch the eye of Henry VIII, and thus the path to the throne began to open, along with the dark shadows that awaited. When Catherine Howard appeared in the court as a lady-in-waiting to Queen Anne of Cleves, no one imagined that in such a short time her life would be completely transformed. Henry VIII, by then over 40, overweight, in poor health, and with a gloomy soul after many failed marriages, saw in Catherine a 17-year-old girl full of youth, radiance, and vitality, a spark that reignited his heart. Catherine's appearance was like a breath of fresh air to the aging king. Henry saw in her not only beauty, but an opportunity to regain the confidence and strength of his lost youth. The court quickly turned this marriage into a political tool, and the Howard family saw it as a resounding victory, elevating their name to a position of power. Catherine became queen amidst admiration and envy. A girl who once went unnoticed now stood side by side with the most powerful king in Europe. But this throne was not only adorned with gold and silver, it also concealed deadly traps. For while Catherine received the crown, she also stepped into a dangerous game where every move could lead to death. Catherine Howard's tragic story is a haunting reminder of the unforgiving nature of the Tudor court. At just 17 years old, she was thrust into the royal spotlight as Henry VIII's fifth wife, a young woman praised for her beauty and vitality. But beneath the youthful exuberance, her past, marked by reckless youthful indiscretions, would soon come back to haunt her in the most devastating way. Catherine's rise from obscurity to queen was swift, but so was her fall from grace, a fall that would end with her execution before the age of 20. Catherine Howard's past relationships became her undoing. Before entering the royal court, she had an affair with Francis Dereham, a man with no noble title, which she considered a youthful folly. But in the rigidly controlled world of the Tudor court, even such past mistakes could be turned into weapons of betrayal. When Catherine's relationship with Dereham was exposed, it was enough to tarnish her reputation, despite her new role as queen. Even more damning was her involvement with Thomas Culpeper, a young courtier, which was seen as a blatant act of infidelity. These secretive liaisons, although never fully proven to be more than flirtations, were enough to spark a cascade of events that led to her tragic end. The question that lingers in history is whether Catherine was merely a naive, reckless young woman, or if she was a pawn in a deeper political game orchestrated by her ambitious family. Some historians argue that Catherine, raised in a family with little regard for strict discipline, was simply a victim of her youthful passions and lack of foresight. She didn't understand the perilous nature of her actions in a court where every gesture could become a weapon against her. However, there is also a perspective that Catherine was used as a tool by the powerful Howard family, who sought to elevate their status by placing her on the throne. Could her affairs have been manipulated to destabilize her position and remove her from power, or were they simply the result of a young woman's reckless heart? As rumors and whispers about Catherine's past reached the ears of Henry VIII, his anger boiled over. For a king as obsessed with loyalty as Henry, the thought of betrayal from his young wife was an unbearable blow. Catherine, once seen as the embodiment of youth and renewal, became a symbol of treachery in his eyes. The revelation of her past relationships turned from personal scandal to political liability, and soon the court was in turmoil. Francis Dereham and Thomas Culpeper were arrested and accused of treason, and Catherine was dragged into the brutal storm of royal retribution. Despite her pleas and the desperate hope for leniency, Catherine's fate was sealed. In 1542, at the age of just 19, she was executed by beheading at the Tower of London. The tragic end of her life was not just the personal heartbreak of a young woman, but a reflection of the terrifying volatility of the Tudor court. A single misstep, no matter how small, could be enough to bring down even the most exalted of queens. Catherine Howard's life and death served as a stark reminder of the high cost of power, beauty, and youthful passion in the unforgiving world of Tudor England. The story of Catherine Howard leaves a mark that is both tragic and haunting in Tudor history. She ascended to the throne with youth and beauty, but left the world before reaching 20, leaving behind an image full of contradictions, a beautiful queen remembered for betrayal and death. The briefness of her life makes Catherine's name forever a symbol of the fragility of power. Catherine's legacy does not lie in political achievements or long-lasting influence, but in the harsh lesson her story reflects. In the Tudor court, the throne was never a place for innocent love or naivete. It was a cold, calculating game where every step had a price. Catherine may have simply been a young girl caught in that whirlwind, or perhaps a pawn in the hands of an ambitious family. Regardless, her outcome reminds future generations that power comes with peril, and weakness will be ruthlessly devoured. Catherine Howard, through her tragic death, became a vivid testament to a truth. In the Tudor court, beauty can open the door to power, but it can also become a death sentence. The story of Catherine Howard ends like a brief but haunting tragedy, where youth, love, and power blend into a death sentence. From an unknown girl, she became the Queen of England, only to end her life on the scaffold before reaching 20. This rapid transformation means that Catherine is remembered not for what she built, but for what she lost. Catherine's death is a brutal reminder that the Tudor throne was never forgiving. A single misstep, a seemingly harmless emotional stir, could become the reason for a life lost. She may have been just a naive young girl, or perhaps a pawn in the hands of the Howard family, but whatever the case, her fate reflects the harshness of the era. In a place where power reigns, the heart has no voice. Catherine Howard has gone, leaving future generations with an unresolved question. Was she guilty or merely a victim? Perhaps the full answer will never be known, but it is this ambiguity that makes her tragedy one of the most tearful chapters in Tudor history. So what do you think? Do you believe Catherine Howard was truly an innocent girl caught in the whirlpool of power, or did she genuinely betray Henry VIII? Share your thoughts in the comments below for everyone to discuss. And don't forget to subscribe to Channel History to keep supporting us in bringing more compelling and emotional historical stories in the upcoming episodes. Welcome to channel